want you to know I have 13 scheduled Bible studies a week. That's how many Bible studies I have. So now you can see why I can't be a preacher. I don't have time for funerals. I don't have time for weddings. I don't have time for, all that counseling and stuff, and sermons. And I'm just studying with people all the time. And I always bring somebody else in with me. So if you brought somebody to me and said, James, I need somebody and we're going to study. You're coming with me. And then maybe there might even be 2 people in there. Or it might be a couple and then me and somebody else. Never study with a woman alone. I would suggest men never do that. Ever, no exception. Even if it's right next to a whole office full of people, there's nobody going to be in my office. It's just me and her. So, leading someone to Christ through the sin problem. We took God's solution to the sin problem, the grace-based system. We looked at all this. Yep, did all that. We looked at faith is determined by covenant. So let's talk about covenant now. This is what Philip wanted me to really hit on. And I love this. And this is where I'm going to slow evangelism down. It's a binding agreement. The covenant relationship is on page 31. Let's turn over to page 31 if you would. And again, I'm going to slow evangelism down here. And guys, I'm going to use this in our Bible study tomorrow, but I think we rush people way too fast to the water a lot of times. People come up, how many baptisms do you guys have? How many baptisms do you have? Everything's about baptism. How about how many conversions do we have? Right? How many people do we make disciples? So now that we see how to get out of our sin problem through faith in Jesus, the next question we need to ask is, how does that faith work? Since faith demands obedience, what is it that God demands of us so that we can connect to God's grace? To answer that, we must first understand the concept of covenant. In this study, we're going to see how important it is to be in covenant relationship with God and the type of covenant that applies to our salvation. So what is a covenant? Oh, I am so glad you asked. You guys were asking, weren't you? Okay. So this is the definition of covenant. It's a disposition, it's a contract, it's a will. The King James Version will interchange words, the covenant, testament, New Testament, Old Testament, New Covenant, Old Testament. That's how the King James uses that. So in essence, a covenant is an agreement, but it's an agreement with a solemn and binding force. The word covenant can also mean testament, agreement, or even imply a contract in a sense. The Bible is split into 2 main sections, the Old and New Testaments. And the more you get into the Bible, you will discover that God has made several covenants with man. And think of these covenants of the Bible as building blocks, each connecting to the other, with the final piece ending with the covenant of Christ or the New Testament. So God is just moving us up the ladder. Okay, and there was a purpose for all of this. He made a covenant with Adam, and then Abraham, and Israel, and David. There were others, but the final piece is the covenant of Jesus. Okay, He's going to bring that whole package together. So when it comes to the Bible, God draws up all the conditions of His covenants, not the other way around. Man can't argue, dispute, or change God's covenants He makes with us, despite the fact that man tries this all the time. You ever heard somebody say, I have my own religion?
Yes.
Sorry, you can't. It doesn't belong to you. Or how about somebody saying, yeah, I have my own church? No, it doesn't belong to you. You didn't die for it. You didn't purchase it with your blood. So this is telling basically God how it's going to be. This is mine. No, it's His. Right? So if I was to ask you, how do you know if you're saved or not? It should not be based on your feelings. Feelings can go up and down, can't they? Right? I mean, one minute you're feeling, man, I'm lost just because of sin or temptation, when in reality, you're not lost. Other times you can feel that you're saved, and in reality, that person's not, right? So feelings can be a fickle thing at best. Salvation can never be based on the feelings of the heart. Rather, it is based on a formal, rational agreement that God makes with Himself and us. And that brings us to the word covenant. So let's look at some different kinds of covenants in the Bible and see if we can understand how these covenants apply and which one applies to our salvation. So here's some different kinds of covenants. So there's a lot of different kinds, but we're just gonna look at three that I find interesting. Okay? I'm gonna call this a one-sided covenant, a self-assumed covenant. This is a covenant of promise. In fact, all covenants have the hope of promise within them. With this covenant, one party imposes obligation to himself. The second party is the one who receives the blessing, but you don't have to do anything for it. In fact, this recipient of this kind of covenant is not represented as doing anything in the matter, either by way of seeking or asking for the covenant, or performing any covenant obligations or conditions. So here's an example of this. Then we know what this is. This is what I believe to be Noah's Ark. Okay? It's about 12 miles from Mount Ararat. There is some dispute about this. I just went to a creation museum over in Glenrose, Texas. And they have that's where the dinosaur tracks and the human tracks are together. Well, they're going to tell you that the people in Kentucky are wrong on the way they built Noah's Ark. They believe it is a box, and they believe it is up out on Mount Ararat, smaller Ararat, and it was found by the Russians. They are going to say that this is built wrong. This is more like a boat. And so, anyways, there's the debate. But with the evidence, I'm going to say that this is Noah's Ark. There's a lot of archaeological evidence. This is where the Babylonians say that the Ark is found. It's actually found in this valley about 12 miles from Mount Ararat. Nobody listened to the Babylonians, so they don't believe in God. But they put it right here. This is the oldest name for this valley. It's called the Valley of Eight. How many people got on the Ark? 8. Okay. These, you can see the rib timbers coming down. Okay. In fact, there are 13 anchor stones here. See these big stones? They have a hole at the top of them. They are found all over the Ark here. They are used for buoyancy. The oldest ships that they have found in the Mediterranean Sea have these anchor stones for them. Okay. They ran sonar across the top of this, and every so many feet that sonar went off. And this is what they found. They find a ton of these. It's a petrified piece of metal spike with petrified wood around it, and they litter this Ark. And then you can see the discoloration of the rib timbers coming down on the side there. So, this is what they believe to be Noah's Ark. Now, God made a covenant with Noah, and he set his bow in the sky, right? And what was that covenant? It's a covenant of promise. I'll never flood the earth again. Well, has God kept that promise? Yes, he has. Here's the thing. Man didn't have to do anything for it. It doesn't matter if man's good. It doesn't matter if he's bad. It doesn't matter what he does. It doesn't matter what the earth does. It doesn't matter what the animals do. God is giving that promise. It's a one-sided covenant, and man has to do nothing for it. Okay, that's a kind of covenant in the Bible. This kind of covenant has nothing to do with our salvation. Okay, it doesn't connect. But it is a kind of covenant. Here is a two-sided covenant. This kind of covenant is between equals. And I think we know about this one. It's the marriage covenant, right? Okay? Marriage rings, right? Okay? So Amy and myself, we entered into a covenant relationship with each other. Now, this is what I mean by equals. Amy said, I'll do this, this, and this. And I sat there and think, that sounds pretty good. And then I said, I'll do this, this, and this. And Amy says, I think I'll do that. And then we both entered into a covenant relationship. Okay? We can find this in the Bible also not only with marriage, but also with friendships, like with David and Jonathan. They were friends with each other. Okay? They made a covenant with each other. They're equals. You'll see this with armies. One nation makes a covenant with another one. They're allies. They watch each other's backs. They're equal. We are not equal with God. We do not tell God, God, I'm going to do this, this, and this. And God says, that sounds pretty good. Yeah. And then God says, I'll do this, this, and this. And I go, no, I won't do it this way or do it that way. And then God goes, yeah, okay. And then we enter into a covenant. Do we do that with God? No. That's not the kind of covenant we enter into. Now, marriage will be used a lot with our relationship with God, but on this end of it, it's not the same because we're not equal with God. The kind of covenant that we are under that deals with our salvation is also a two-sided covenant, but it's a covenant made by the superior, and it's made to man, which is inferior. So this is a pretty good example of this. All right, guys, come on, you history buffs here. What's this a picture of here?
Japanese surrender.
Japanese surrender. That's right. They are surrendering. Now, who has the upper hand here? Who's showing their muscle here?
U.S.
The U.S. Okay, so the U.S. is superior here. Just dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan. And when they sign, they are signing an unconditional surrender. Is that not correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So, one party is superior to the inferior, which is Japan. All right? Can you see that? And this is what I want our student to understand, because I don't want our student trying to tell God how it's going to be. Because we have that happen, don't we?
Sure.
Right? People in the church go, oh, no. I have my own religion. I have my own church. I decide how it's going to be. No, we can't do that. So we're going to look at a story in the book of Ezekiel. Now, let me set the scene for Ezekiel. So in the book of Daniel, the Babylonians have been sent in by God, and they have laid a siege around Jerusalem. Okay? And in the book of Jeremiah actually writes about this. He's a prophet while that's happening. Daniel, just prior to this, years before, was taken into slavery by the Babylonians. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? Okay? So Daniel talks about this, Jeremiah talks about this, and Ezekiel will talk about this. But Ezekiel is actually after they've been hauled into slavery, and he's over in Babylon. And here in Ezekiel 17, he is going to give a story. He's going to give like a history lesson of how that all took place. But it's interesting what he says. Watch what he says here. Then the word of the Lord came to me. Say to this rebellious house, this is Israel, do you not know what these things mean? Say to them, the king of Babylon went to Jerusalem and carried off her king and her nobles, bringing them back into Babylon. Then he took a member of the royal family and made a treaty with them, putting him under oath. He also carried away the leading men of the land. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were smart, right? Leading men. So that the kingdom would be brought low, unable to rise again. Surviving only by what? Keeping the treaty. That's the only way you're going to survive. But the king rebelled. So they're going to go through a series of kings. Okay. Now we're down to King Zedekiah. He sent by sending envoys to Egypt to get horses and a large army. Will he succeed? Will he who does such things escape? Will he break the treaty and yet escape? As surely as the Lord lives, declares the sovereign Lord, he shall die in Babylon, in the land of the king who put him on the throne, whose oath he despised and whose treaty he broke. Pharaoh with his mighty army and great horde will be of no help in war when ramps are built, siege works rejected to destroy many lives. He despised the oath by keeping the what? By breaking the what? He didn't keep covenant. Because he had given his hand in pledge, and yet he did all these things, he shall not escape. So here's King Zedekiah. The Babylonians come in third time, okay? They laid a siege around the nation again in 586 BC. And here's King Zedekiah. He says, I'm not paying your taxes anymore. Well, here comes the Babylonians. He runs through the back of the wall. Here goes all of his sons. They all run out in the field. The Babylonians catch up to him. They take all of his sons, line them up in front of King Zedekiah, and kill every one of them in front of his eyes. Then they took his eyes, gouged them out, and sent him to slavery, where he died. Why? Because he didn't keep the covenant. This study shows the seriousness of God. Do you think that's okay to show a student before they get baptized? To show the seriousness of God? Or should we hide that from them? So, when God enters into a covenant relationship with man, he institutes a life and death bond, a blood bond. A covenant is a bond in blood or a bond of life and death, and administered by the suzerain, or the superior, which is God, to the vassal, or inferior, which is man. Man's not on equal basis with God, even though sometimes we want to think we are. This is why man tries to call the shots, telling God how it will work. Every time man tries this, he ends up in trouble, just like Judah did. This is the kind of covenant that's most important to understand, because it dictates the concept of man being saved. Okay? You with me so far? All right, so now we understand about covenant. Now let's talk about God for a minute. The question is this: is God bound by covenant? So we're going to go to a very interesting story. Genesis 15. So here God is making a promise to Abram. He's been promising him a child. 75, it's back again, 80, 85, 90. He keeps saying, you're going to have a kid, and you're going to be the father of many nations because of this kid. And he just keeps getting older, older, and his wife keeps getting older and older. Would you start asking questions after a while?
Yeah.
I would. Okay, well, that's what Abraham does. So here in Genesis 15, in verse 7, he says, he also said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land and take possession of it. But Abram says, Sovereign Lord, how can I know I'll take possession of it? How am I going to know you're going to keep your promises? Here's his answer. If you were going to ask God, how do I know you're going to keep your promise, God? Would this be an odd way of God telling you how he's going to keep his promises? So the Lord said to him, bring me a heifer, a goat, a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon. Abram brought all these to him, cut them in two, and arranged the halves opposite each other. The birds, however, he did not cut in half. So there's your answer. That's how you know if God's going to keep your promise or not. Take a bunch of animals and cut them in two, and leave an aisle down the middle? That's kind of odd, isn't it? You can say that. Yeah. So what would it look like if Abraham did this? It'd be a bloody mess, wouldn't it? There'd be an aisle of blood running down the middle of it. Okay? Now, watch what happens. Abram then falls into a deep sleep and sees a fiery pot and a torch pass between the animals. This is a vision of God passing through the animals, showing that the ceremony is complete. So, what does it say here? Phil, why don't you read this for us, please? Because I'm going to run out of steam here.
When the sun had set and darkness had fallen, a smoking firepot with a blazing torch appeared to pass between the pieces. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram and said, to your descendants I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river the Euphrates, in the land of the Kenites, Kenites, Cadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephaites, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgasites, and Jebusites.
I knew I could depend on Phil. I knew I could. All right, so there's the story. Here's the fiery torch and the fiery pot. It passed between the pieces, right? God makes covenant with Abraham. No explanation given. Just, I made a covenant with you. Kind of odd, isn't it? Well, here's the beauty of the Bible. The beauty of the Bible is we're going to go over to Jeremiah. Remember what I told you about Jeremiah? Jeremiah is in Babel. He's in Jerusalem, and the Babylonians are making a siege around Jerusalem, okay? And he's warning the people that, hey, he's telling them God's doing this to you. Watch what he said. So, Philip, I'm going to call on you one more time if you'll read this one for us.
Therefore, this is what the Lord says: you have not obeyed me. You have not proclaimed freedom for your fellow countrymen. So now I proclaim freedom for you, declares the Lord, freedom to fall by the sword, plague, and famine. I will make you abhorrent to all the kingdoms of the earth. The men who have violated my covenant and have not fulfilled the terms of my covenant they made before me, I will treat like the calf they cut in two and then walked between its pieces.
Oh, there it is. There it is. So God is angry with Israel. They're not keeping covenant. And because they're not keeping covenant, when they made a covenant, they took the calf, they cut it in two, and walked between the pieces. But notice this key verse here. I will treat you like the calf. What did they do with the calf? Killed it, cut it in two. When you don't keep covenant, what does God do in a sense? He will kill you and cut you in two. When God passed between the pieces, he has death on both sides of him. There are dead animals on both sides. He is, in a sense, passing through the blood. Okay? You see this? Look at that picture right there. See, covenant is a blood bond. And if you don't keep covenant, you pay with what? You pay with your blood. There you go, in a sense, right? So the leaders of Judah and Jerusalem, the court officials, the priests, and all the people of the land who walk between the pieces of the calf, I will hand over to their enemies who seek their lives, which he did. Their dead bodies will become food for the birds of the air and beasts of the earth, because they didn't keep covenant. Is this concept in the Bible for a reason for us? Can we relate to this, even if it's in the Old Testament? There's a purpose for this, isn't it? Yeah. So you're starting to see the serious side of God, right? Okay. So, why should this be important to us? It's because of our salvation. When I go before God in the final judgment, how do I know if he will grant us forgiveness and give us eternal life? It all has to do with covenant. If we meet our end of the covenant agreement, then God has to keep his end. How do I know this? Because he is bound, in a sense, by blood. This should give us more confidence in understanding our salvation. Have you ever had a day where you're just like your kids come to you and you're going, I just don't feel it, or I don't like the look on your faces today, or whatever? Have you ever judged people incorrectly? Right? Okay. Will God have a day like that with us? He's just like, I'm having a bad day. I'm just not. I don't like the way you're looking today. I'm not going to let you into heaven. Does he operate that way? No. So if we keep covenant, he has to keep his end. Right? That makes sense? That's important, isn't it? Okay. Man now is also bound by covenant. Okay, so here's covenant. This has happened in Genesis 15. So far, it's just kind of been a one-sided covenant because God entered through. But now we're going to see Abraham enter in, and it's going to be a two-sided covenant. So watch this. Genesis 17. So here's Abraham. What we're going to be looking for is the word Abraham, circumcision, blood, and covenant. Okay? If you can't find this. Oh, and if you want to know what Abraham looked like, you didn't know they had cameras back then, but this is him. So you see him at the ball game, at the Houston game or whatever. That's him. All right, Genesis 17. All right, so then God said to Abraham, as for you, you must keep my covenant, you and your descendants after you for the generations to come. This is the covenant with you and your descendants after you, the covenant you're to keep. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You are to undergo circumcision, and it will be the sign of of the covenant made between me and you. For the generations to come, every male among you who is 8 days old must be circumcised, including those born in your household or bought with money from a foreigner. Those who are not your offspring, whether born in your household or bought with your money, they must be circumcised. My covenant in your flesh, which is to be an everlasting covenant. Any uncircumcised male who has not been circumcised in the flesh will be cut off from his people, because he is what? Broken my covenant. You can open this door.
Thank you.
Okay. Because it's getting a little warm. There was a vacuum going on, but yeah. See, this is how you save heat, by putting like 40 people in a room. They will produce their own heat. Okay. So, here's Abraham. Okay. So now he is playing a part in this, isn't he? Okay. And he's the first one to enter. He is going to be the first Hebrew to enter into this covenant. Let's go down a little bit farther, and let's talk about Moses and his son. Look for the word circumcision, blood, covenant. Now, Moses has been with God, talking to him at the burning bush on Mount Sinai. God told him to go back to Egypt, tell Pharaoh to let his people go. Well, he didn't want to go at first, did he? So, God gets a little angry with him, and finally he goes. And now he's on his way. At a lodging place on the way, the Lord met Moses and was about to kill him. Did you know that was in the Bible? God was going to kill Moses? God, you can't kill Moses. We're going to need him. He's going to lead the people into Israel and, bring them out of Egypt. And he's going to write the first 5 books of the Bible, right? Why would God want to kill Moses? So watch what happens. So here's Zipporah. Zipporah is his Midian wife. Okay, remember Moses fled to Midian? So he marries this woman, Zipporah. She takes a flint knife, cut off her son's foreskin, and touched Moses' feet with it. Now, this word touched here should really be threw it at him. She's mad. Because watch what she says. Surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me, she said. In Texan, they would say, you're fixing to get yourself killed. Okay? That's how they would say it in Texan, if there was a Texan writing the Bible. Okay? You're ready to get yourself killed. Why was God going to kill them? Watch what happens at verse 26. So the Lord let him alone. So God's going to kill him here, and he lets him alone here. What happened in between? Their child was circumcised. Okay? What did God tell the Hebrews, the Israelites? They were to circumcise their child what? On the 8th day of life. Moses knows he's an Israelite. He knows about this. Probably told his wife about it. But he ain't stepping up and doing it. So who steps up and does it? His wife. And so as soon as this happens, God lets him alone. Is God serious about this? Is he? It's pretty serious. He's about ready to take the old boy out. He's going to kill him. Let's go a little bit farther. So you see circumcision here is dealing with blood, right? Hate to gross you out. That's what it is. So let's go a little bit farther with Moses. This part is not in the workbook. Let's look for the words children of Israel, blood, and covenant. So here's Moses coming down from Mount Sinai. He is now taking this and reading the covenant to the people. Watch what happens. Exodus 24. You can write this in your workbooks if you want. Exodus 24, 6 through 8. This is another good example you might want to share with your student. Moses took half of the blood and put it into bowls. The other half he sprinkled on the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it to the people. And what did they say? We'll do it. Okay, here's the book of the covenant. Read it to the people. We'll do it. All right? Moses then took the blood, sprinkled it on who? Could you imagine that? Could you imagine coming out of a church service with blood sprinkled all over you? People think we're nutty enough, right? What we do? Boy, they'd really think we're crazy going down to Outback after services and stuff with blood all over us, right?
Here come the Christians.
What are you guys? Yeah, what are you guys doing down there? He took the blood and sprinkled it on the people and said, "This is the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance with all His words." Why would God want you to go home with blood on you? Because you just said you would keep it. And He might be wanting you to think about this and say, you know what? If I don't keep this covenant, I'm going to pay with my blood. Again, is this serious? Is this in our Bibles? It is. It is. Let's keep going. So covenant is a blood bond. If you don't keep it, you pay with your blood. Serious side of God. Now, people for some reason like to compartmentalize the Bible. They almost want to make God of the Old Testament a judgment God. And then all of a sudden when he comes to the New Testament, he all of a sudden changes and he's like the God of love. Okay? Do you see judgment in the Old Testament from God? Do you see love in the Old Testament from God? Yes. Do you see judgment in the New Testament about God? Yeah, Ananias and Sapphira dropped dead, right? Do you see love from God? Look at Malachi says he does not change. So what we want to show our students is we don't want them to get this idea and think, well, that was all, yeah, that's all Old Testament, James. What about the New Testament? So let's take them over to the book of Hebrews. Now, explain to your student that we are not under that old covenant anymore. Okay, circumcision and all that. Show them in Colossians here and Hebrews. We're not under that. Okay. But the point is, no matter what covenant you're under, God expects you to keep it. So now let's go to the New Testament and see the seriousness. Okay? Hebrews chapter 10. If we deliberately keep on sinning after we have received the knowledge of truth, no sacrifice of sin is left, but only a fearful expectation of judgment and of raging fire that will consume the enemies of God. In the book of Romans, chapter 5, before we became Christians, it called us enemies of God. I get that. These people are Christians. He calls them enemies. Why? Because they are deliberately sinning. So he uses an example from the Old Testament. Anyone who rejected the law of Moses died without mercy on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. Okay? So if you violated the law, they'd get some stones out, stone you to death. How much more severely do you think a man deserves to be punished who has trampled the Son of God underfoot? Could you imagine you as a Christian sticking your back in the back of Jesus? Or sticking your foot in the back of Jesus. Can you imagine that? Who has treated as an unholy thing the blood of the covenant that sanctified him. Could you imagine you walking by Jesus and spitting in his face and saying, I don't need your holy blood to sanctify me? And who has treated as an unholy thing the blood of the covenant that sanctified him, and who has insulted the Spirit of grace? For it is mine to avenge, right? I will repay, and again, the Lord will judge his people. It is a dreadful thing to fall in the hands of the living God. This was written to Christians. That's who the book of Hebrews is written to. And they are leaving Jesus. And if you look back at the context, what is the deliberate sin? Verse 25, they are neglecting to meet together. They are leaving Jesus. So if you leave Jesus, it's like sticking your foot in his back. It's like spitting in his face and say, I don't need your blood to sanctify me, your holy blood of the covenant. you are insulting the Spirit of grace. So now let's ask the Bible in the New Testament, is God serious about this? Is this too much to give a new person coming to Christ? We've already shown them the sin problem. They're in trouble, right? We showed them how to get out of that problem. It points to Jesus. There's your grace, right? But you got to have faith. You got to do your part. Okay, it's going to take some action. And this action is to be seriously taken. That's the point. And it all has to do with covenant. So when we enter into a covenant with God and we fail to do our part, we also will be put to death. Spiritual separation from God. This is why it is so important for all of us to understand the concept of covenant. If we don't, it could cost us our eternal lives. Conclusion. After considering what we have studied thus far, I have a question for us. If we show up on Judgment Day and we're not in covenant relationship with God, say you never even entered into a covenant with God, okay? We're going to see that in the next study. What obligates God to give you heaven? You're standing there saying, God, let me in. Let me in. It's Judgment Day. Let me in. God's like, we don't have an agreement. We don't have a contract between us. There's no covenant here. What obligates God? Nothing. There's nothing, right? Now, guys, I just got to say this, okay? I don't think I've ever heard a preacher in the Church of Christ preach on this concept of covenant. I just can't remember one. I don't remember anybody doing it. Well, I mean, I have, but is this an important concept? Why aren't we talking about this? This is how God operates. He is a covenant God. There's a lot here, right? In the next study, we're going to see there's a lot more. So covenant is very important. So if there's no contract, there's nothing to bind us. God, give us heaven. So I'm standing
by
there.
his nature, he has to punish what he said was punished. There's not really mercy left.
It's just the way it is. Do you think the people that are driving by this building right now on Waters Road here, do you think any of them understand this? Well, who's going to tell them? The president? Biden's going to tell them today in the speech, right? He's going to use his PowerPoint and explain all this today, right? No. Our school system, is that going to tell them?
No.
Who's going to tell them?
Gotta be us.
It's got to be us. Yes. It's got to be us. No contract. There's no deal. So continue to study this chapter to find out what covenant applies to us today so that we can enter into that covenant with God so we can be assured of eternal life. So, I spent the last 26 years putting this workbook together. I'm glad you guys are getting some of the material. It's just here to help you, whatever you find helpful. I'm just glad you guys are getting some of this. If you don't think it's helpful, don't get it. Don't waste your money. There is other ways, systematically to lead people to Jesus. This one works for me. And the reason that I put this together is because when I first got out of preaching school and I got to my first work, Beulah, there were people that were bringing me presents. Okay? Well, my cat did that many years ago. Our cat. It's really my sister's cat. So I'm growing up. We have a tri-level house. Okay, my dad built a tri-level house for us in Michigan. Okay, have you ever seen a tri-level house? They got basements up there. So, part of the house is half is underground, half is above one of the stories, and then it has a full basement underneath it. There's actually 4 levels. Okay. Well, my dad forgot to hook up the plumbing into some of the plumbing in the bathroom of the one that my sister and myself use. So he had to cut a hole in the drywall. They call it drywall up there. Down here it's sheetrock, right? Okay. So he cuts a hole out of there. Well, it'd be pretty cool because we would be sitting in the living room watching TV, and we could hear our cat. It like got up inside the garage. You could hear it walking across the ceiling, and then it would get in the middle of the wall where and it would jump up underneath the bathtub and then come out that hole. We thought it was just so funny. Well, I had a sister. We didn't get along good. One of the reasons why is because she's a teenager, I'm a teenager, and she would go in and use all the hot water in the shower. I mean, she'd be in there 2 hours, steam's just filling the whole house. And I'm like, how do I get back at her? Well, I didn't have to get back at her because our cat brought her a present while she was in the shower. It was called the baby rabbit. And she took that rabbit and tore it to pieces. Every time it moved, it would scratch at it. Blood everywhere, fur everywhere. She is in the shower so long she has no idea this is happening out there. And she finally comes out. She's screaming like mad. My mom's home. And so we finally get in the bathroom and stuff. And I just thought that was so funny. It's like finally somebody got back at her. Well, the very next day, the cat brought me a present and did that underneath my bed. And so I took that cat and I threw it out of that window, that upper window, and it was flipping like this. But don't worry, the cat lands on its feet and took off, but it didn't bring me any more presents. My point is, the church used to bring me presents, and I was very flattered at first. People were saying, James, my first work just out of preaching school, all this excitement. We got somebody for you to study with. Great, wonderful. And then they'd bring me somebody else. I study with them. They'd bring me somebody else to study with them. And after a while, I started saying, wait a minute. Why can't you guys study with them? Oh, James, you don't understand. We sent you to preaching school. You know where all the verses are at. We don't know where all those verses are at. I'm like, we got to do something about that. That's what that work looks for. Mm-hmm. So now they don't have any excuse. And neither do you, because I saw that you got them all, so you don't have any excuse. So stop bringing your preacher presents. But if people's do, they're going to come with me. So
actually, this goes to where you were speaking in Jeremiah, because God tells him that the time is coming when I will make a new covenant. It will not be like the covenant I made with your forefathers.
Don't steal my next class. That's in the next class. We got another covenant. We got another
part where no
You're gonna keep killing it.
It's going to keep going there. It's going to keep going there.
Shred that rabbit.
Stop. This is the first lesson in covenant. We got 2 more. You guys want to take a break, short break, get you something to drink or whatever, and then we'll go at it and we'll finish it out, and we will actually get you guys out of here early today.